Most people in China don't believe in God. The question doesn't mean anything to them. The question is unfamiliar to them. The concept of God is unfamiliar to them. Yeah, I know, some people may nitpick and may complain about how simple I make it seem, but it simply is that simple.
How is it possible? How is it possible that people are so ignorant about the history, politics, and religion of China?
Let's talk about China. What about the guy in China? In China, it doesn't even matter whether you believe in God or not. The question is completely irrelevant. It wouldn't make sense for an average Chinese person to sit here and to explain to the Chinese people why he doesn't believe in God. Because nobody believes in God. People would just sit and be like, why are you telling us this? Most people in China don't believe in God. The question doesn't mean anything to them. And this is not an active act of disbelief, of disbelieving. No, the question is unfamiliar to them. The concept of God is unfamiliar to them. They're not discussing whether they do believe or don't believe in God. The question doesn't exist. It's irrelevant. Most people in China will never become Muslims and will never become Christians and will never find the one true God. So why do they exist? How is it conceivable that one religion is true, one God is true, and he expects everybody to seek and find him? That he expects every Chinese person to seek and find this true religion, to find this true God, but most Chinese people never engage in that, let alone being successful. They all just live and die without ever thinking about God, while we are sitting here talking about whether God exists or not, like it is a universal existential question. Because to us, this is an existential question, because we have a history of Abrahamic monotheism. But they don't, which is why it's not even a trivial question to them. Meanwhile, according to Islam, Islam is true, and all those people who are born into Islam will conveniently go to heaven because they will live as Muslims and die as Muslims, even if they don't do anything. And no one has an answer about all those poor Chinese people whom Allah has created or God has created, but that He doesn't seem to care about. Yeah, I know, some people may nitpick and may complain about how simple I make it seem, but it simply is that simple.
What this man has said to you is just as absurd as if he told you that Aristotle, back in ancient Athens, had absolutely no concept of God. That if you walked up to Aristotle and started a conversation about faith, about whether or not people believe in God, he'd just have no idea what you were talking about. He'd just have no concept. Now, I say Aristotle specifically rather than the average man on the street in ancient Greece, because in case you haven't heard, Aristotle's speculations about the true nature of God were so appealing to Christians. They feel that this is so compatible with their faith that even though Aristotle was a pagan, even though Aristotle, in terms of doctrine, will end up in hell, and this is addressed in Dante's Inferno, by the way, Dante invents a whole new concept of an intermediate state between heaven and hell where people like Aristotle go up. But prior to Dante's poetry, which is non-canon, it's not, Dante's work is not considered part of the Bible. It's not quite considered the Word of God. Prior to Dante inventing this interregnum state here, by the way, Aristotle's in hell. Despite all this, Christians embraced Aristotle as a church father, as one of the crucial, most important philosophers for the Catholic faith. And today, I'm really surprised, in the United States, Protestants in America, they still really embrace Aristotle also. See, what he has to say about God is so compatible with what they want to hear. How is it possible in the 21st century that people are still so balefully ignorant about China? And how is it possible for this YouTuber to just take his fantasy and project it onto Asia? Could be China, could be India, in this case perhaps China, in the same way that Europeans did, not even in the 19th century. This is really going back to the 18th century. We have a long history of this pattern playing out again and again and again. Now, in China, Tian, heaven, what you saw on screen there, That is more like the abstract, faceless concept of God that today is the most popular idea of God in Christianity, Judaism, and to my knowledge, in Islam. Now, Islam covers a large and diverse part of the world's surface. I don't know if that's the most popular way of thinking about the Muslim God in Indonesia, for example, but certainly the university-educated Muslims I've encountered, some from Iran, some from the Arab world, they really are thinking of God in the same terms as this Chinese symbol Tian. Not that God is a particular person who walks with his feet on the ground and has hands and eyes and a face and emotions. Not that God can weep or laugh, but that God is this abstract, transcendental principle. Head note, I once read a translation into English of one of the very first books ever published in the Cree language. So Cree Nihiawewen is an indigenous language of Canada. So what most people call American Indians, great term. The native people found in Canada, the United States. And this is a Christian preacher explaining to these people the concept of God. And this was already at a stage where they'd encountered enough Christian missionaries that they had their own views on this matter. And he's answering objections from them where they say, look, we've read the Bible, or they've had some contact with these Bible stories. In the Bible, it says things like God has hands and God walked from this place and met this person. Like, it's describing God as a physical person on the ground. They could relate to that, right? They're like, no, what you're saying is not true. And the Christian preacher is replying back. I think he was a Jesuit. This guy is saying, no, that's just an allegory. No, really, God has no hands and no feet. He's not a physical person. So this conflict has existed within Christianity, at least for centuries. There's a 19th century German philosopher called Max Stirner. And there's one portion, he only really wrote one famous book. He did a few other things, but he has this one famous book called The Ego on Its Own, which, by the way, is a rollicking atheist, anti-establishment diatribe. It's completely anti-Christian. There's one portion that most people perceive as being racist against Chinese people. It helps if you read it in German and not in English, by the way. But the real point of that portion of the book is to ridicule Europeans and ridicule Christianity in Europe at that time. And one of the things he says is, look, the most sophisticated philosophies among the Christians, all they accomplish is catching up with the Chinese. What you've done is taken the Judeo-Christian God, who had a beard and a voice and hands and feet and interacts like he's a superhero originally in the older parts of the Old Testament, the same way Zeus is a kind of superhero. You've taken him and transformed him or reinterpreted him into Tian. He says, you worship Tian, the god of the Chinese, this more abstract principle of heaven ruling earth, right? Now, there may be a lot of things wrong with the philosophy of Max Stirner, and there may even be some racism in there, don't get me wrong. He talks about the Mongolism of Europeans, that Europe emerged from the Dark Ages only to become Mongolians ourselves in trying to catch up with the sophistication of Chinese culture. So if you read that as racist, still the point is satirical to really take a poke at the pretensions that Europeans have to being superior to the Chinese. The point is here, Aristotle, he does have this abstract monotheistic concept. Normally in English we say the Godhead, of kind of the one true God, this very abstract God. But of course Aristotle also has a polytheistic concept of many gods with particular names and particular people like Zeus and what have you, Zeus, and then getting into demigods like Heracles, Hercules, the colorful cast of superheroes that people in ancient Greece were more familiar with, and household gods or what have you. Today in Hinduism, modern Hinduism, we don't have to go back to ancient Hinduism, you talk about very much the same thing. They have a monotheistic concept of God. They also have a polytheistic worldview, so on and so forth. Now in China, yes, unless we're going all the way back to the Zhou dynasty, unless we're going back to pre-Han China, thousands and thousands of years ago, then we're basically talking, let's say for the last 2,500 years in China, to use a nice round number, we are talking about a China where they do have this abstract monotheistic idea of God, Tian. They also have the concept of particular gods, particular demigods, particular demons, and then there's the lively competition between Buddhism, which is either gradually or suddenly imported from India on more than one route, depending on which theory you subscribe to about how exactly Buddhism is, between Buddhism and then this variety of indigenous philosophical and religious tradition. All of them are full of gods. All of them are full of supernatural conceptions. And all of them, of course, are concerned, really concerned, with concepts like when you die, do you become a ghost? Like people cared about this stuff. You see it throughout literature. When I started studying things ancient and Asian, I became a kind of expert in places like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, to some extent Sri Lanka, Myanmar. A lot of my stuff pertained to Myanmar. And even then, it wasn't like mainstream Myanmar. It was like northeastern Myanmar. Oh yeah, and then I got heavily into indigenous people of Yunnan, China. These are not today politically powerful, influential thinkers. And whenever I'd meet other scholars, for example, to talk about India, I would always disclaim, look, I'm not really a specialist in India. Like I only deal with India as it kind of connects to this other part of the world. And then within 5 minutes, I'd realize I know much more about history, politics, and religion of India than the other person I'm talking to. This happened to me again and again and again. I was like, okay, at what point do I stop warning people that I'm not really an expert in India? Because everyone else's level of expertise is so abominably low. And yes, I am talking about people with PhDs. I'm definitely including people with PhDs. It's happened to me again and again. With China, it's mind-blowing to me. I mean, I can't really make excuses for people and say, well, Cambodia doesn't count. Cambodia counts, motherfucker. I mean, to me, Haiti counts. If you're talking about the abolition of slavery, the history of the abolition of slavery in Haiti counts. If you're talking about European colonialism, European imperialism, the history of Haiti counts. The fact that it's a small island doesn't mean the example doesn't matter. And there are really profound lessons to be learned from the history of Haiti that still matter today. So, in the same way, I care about Cambodia, and I basically require the rest of humanity to care also. Kind of, how dare you, remove them from the ledger of disasters in human history. We all throw around this phrase so casually, learning the lessons of history. Yeah, well, the verb there is learn. Yeah, it's hard work. If you put in a few hours to learn something about the history of Cambodia, it's going to enrich your life. It really is. I mean that. Take some time out of your schedule playing World of Warcraft to learn something about Cambodia. You'd be amazed at just how rewarding it is. But, sure, you can't expect people to have even read one Wikipedia article about the history of Cambodia. I get that. I had to live with that for years and years and years. And then I shift into dealing with China. How is it possible? How is it possible that people are so ignorant about the history, politics, and religion of China? How is it possible that they shamelessly and seriously advance these claims without one Google search, without one check of a Wikipedia article? I just don't get it. Babe, could you grab for me Sun Tzu there in the middle rank of the bookshelf? Look, what is important in history? This is the Sun Tzu. No offense. No, I'm guessing you've never heard of this book before. All right? Why? Is this book more or less important historically than Aristotle? Who decided which books you read in school and what matters? And at what point are you going to step up, take responsibility for your own education, and not just do the reading yourself, but really reconsider what it is that's important for a well-educated person to have read? What's important for someone like Apostate Prophet or someone like myself to have read, to have considered before coming here on YouTube and fronting like you're a leader of public opinion, like you're a public intellectual? I don't mean this in a shallow or catty way. I hope some of you in the audience can take some positive motivation from this, because the truth is, it's not hard to learn. All right, I'm not even talking about something that's as difficult to learn as how to do your own taxes. All right? I'm talking about having some awareness of your own ignorance and taking some responsibility for your own education. Preferably before you come on the internet like this and make a goddamn fool of yourself.